Bella, how many times am I going to wake you? We are waiting for breakfast.
My Aunt Martha stood over my bed, an angry scowl on her face. Can't you make breakfast yourselves? Martha clutched the pearls on her neck as if I'd insulted her.
Why would we do such a thing?
I hated my Aunt Martha. My mom died when I was 4 years old and my dad left soon after. I often dreamed of my mother and her beautiful smile. I looked just like her. I wanted to be a beauty queen like she was. Growing up, I used to wait by the window, waiting for Mom to come back and take me far away. But Martha made sure I knew that she was never coming back. Neither was my dad. Martha made me clean and pick after her and her daughter Annabelle. Whenever I complained, she told me I should be grateful that she took me in when nobody else wanted me. When I was younger, she threatened to put me in a foster home. At the time, I had no idea where that was, but it sounded terrible, so I did everything she asked. Hi, my name is Bella. It means beautiful. All my life, my Aunt Martha told me that I didn't deserve that name. Watch my story and find out how an encounter with a stranger proved her wrong. After I graduated high school, Martha told me she couldn't afford to pay for college. Instead, she had me waiting tables at a restaurant she owned.
Bella, order for table 8 is ready.
Sandra, one of the chefs, yelled. I hurriedly loaded a tray with everything the customer had ordered. I placed the tray at the table and asked the customer if he needed anything else. He didn't answer me. He just stared at my face. Your breakfast is on the tray and not on my face, creep, I thought to myself as I walked off. I'd never seen him at the restaurant before. I hoped he would never come back. There was something about the way he looked at me. It made me uncomfortable. The rest of my day was uneventful, but my mind kept wandering back to the man at table 8. He looked like he wanted to say something to me. Whatever it was, guess I'd never know. I didn't have a car, so I always walked home. I got my earphones and put on some music. I enjoyed the 1 hour it took to walk home. I'd pretend to be a model walking the runway in Paris just like my mom. I'd imagine cameras flashing in my face as the crowd cheered.
Excuse me, Bella?
Was someone calling my name? I took out my earphones and turned around. The man from that morning was standing there. I dropped my phone and started to run back into the restaurant. Stay away from me!
Bella, oh my god, are you alright?
Sandra held my shoulders as I tried to catch my breath. Just then, table 8 walked in carrying my phone and my earphones. I told you to stay away from me!
I'm sorry for scaring you. It wasn't my intention. Can we talk, please? I promise I'm not a creep or anything.
Hey, I saw you this morning.
Yes, you did. My name is Romano. I'd like to talk to Bella privately if that's all right with her.
Talk about what?
Go on, Bella. I'll be right behind the counter if you need me. I've got 911 on speed dial, mister, so no funny business.
Romano smiled as he led me to a table nearby.
Did you already eat? You can have something while we talk.
I'm not hungry. Now talk. What do you want? Why are you stalking me? Romano laughed.
I'd hardly call it that. I'm a photographer with a modeling agency, and I'd like to offer you a job.
What kind of job? I have no experience in photography. He looked sad for a moment, then smiled.
You have no idea, do you? How beautiful you are. The last time I saw a face like yours was, let's just say, I'd be honored to photograph you.
Me? I'm not a model. I just wait tables here.
You could be. I've been looking for you. I mean, someone like you. You'd be perfect for my agency.
I don't even know you. Again, Romano looked sad.
I understand that. How about I leave you my card? It has my number and address on it. Call me if you change your mind. I hope you do.
He stood up and waved at Sandra, then left. I stared at the card for a long time. Who would want me to model for them? I was not beautiful. When I got home, I told Aunt Martha about Romano. I even showed her his card. She laughed and called me stupid.
He's just trying to get you into bed with him. If he was looking for models, he'd ask Annabelle, not you.
You'd think that with all the hurtful things my aunt said to me, I'd be used to it. But her words still hurt so much. I left the table and ran to my bedroom. A few minutes later, she knocked on the door and I thought she had realized how hurtful her words were and was there to apologize. I opened the door, ready to forgive her.
We are done eating. The table won't clear itself.
I decided to call Romano the next day. I couldn't live like this anymore. Romano sounded so happy to hear from me so soon. I took a cab and found him waiting for me at the agency.
Bella, I'm so happy you're here. Come.
I followed him to his office where huge posters of models hung on the walls. There was no way I could look like them. We spoke over a cup of coffee. He answered all my questions, and the more we spoke, the more relaxed I felt. By the end of our meeting, I was sold. I left Romano's office so happy I was practically bouncing. I went straight to the restaurant and shared the good news with Sandra.
Congratulations, honey. I can't wait to see you on a magazine cover.
Sandra hugged me. We said our tearful goodbyes, and I promised to keep in touch even after I became famous. I'd been working with Romano and his team for close to a month. Living with Martha was unbearable, now more than before. I was waiting for my first paycheck so I could get my own apartment. One day we worked so late it was close to midnight when I got home. Romano dropped me off at the door. I found Martha so angry I thought I saw smoke coming out her ears.
Is he paying you to sleep with him? Don't think I haven't noticed your new fancy clothes and your makeup. Your mother would be disappointed if she saw the kind of girl you've become. I'm glad you're not my daughter. I'd be so ashamed.
My mother loved me. I wish she never died and left me with an evil woman like you. I was so angry.
You ungrateful child. After all I did for you.
She slapped my face. I ran out the door and kept running. I didn't care where I went as long as it was away from that monster. After walking around for an hour, I called Romano. I could barely get any words out in between my sobs.
Bella, slow down. Tell me what happened.
Romano picked me up a few minutes later. He found me sitting by the side of the road shivering. I had no jacket on, just the dress I'd been wearing during our shoot.
Belle, is this how your aunt treats you? For how long?
Belle. The way he said my name, it sounded so familiar. Bella.
What?
You called me Belle. He was quiet for some time.
It's what your mother used to call you.
Yeah, I miss her. Wait, how do you know that? I grabbed the car door handle ready to bolt. Who was this man?
Please, let's go somewhere and talk. It's freezing out here.
I'm not going anywhere with you until you tell me who you really are.
I knew your mother.
Who are you?
I'm so sorry. This is not how I wanted you to find out.
Find out what? Can you tell me what's going on?
My name is Richard, not Romano. I'm your father.
No, you are not. My father left me a long time ago. He has another family now.
Is that what Martha told you?
I couldn't sit still. I thought my heart would beat a hole in my chest. I looked up at the man claiming to be my father, and I didn't know what to believe or what to feel. I was angry, but somehow relieved. I was angry at him for leaving me, but relieved he was back. My head was going to explode.
Please, say something.
Why did you come back?
I've been gathering the courage to talk to you for months. I called Martha, but she told me that you wanted nothing to do with me. She refused to tell me where you were, so I came to the house one day. She was furious. She said that you were away at college and I was not to bother you.
I didn't know.
I left my card with her and I told her to give it to you. A few days later, a girl showed up at the agency and claimed to be you.
What? Who was it?
Martha's daughter, Annabelle.
Why would she do that?
She came to tell me to stay away, that she was happy with Martha and didn't want me back in her life.
As Richard spoke, I realized that my Aunt Martha was even worse than I thought. The devil had nothing on her.
When I told her that I knew she wasn't you, she confessed that it was all her mother's idea. She told me where to find you. I told her to tell Martha that their plan had worked.
Richard had waited a few days, then showed up at the restaurant. I was speechless. Why did you leave me? He held his hands together and looked at the floor.
The house you live in belonged to your grandfather. When he died, he left it to Martha and your mother. After your mom died, Martha kicked us out. I begged her to let you stay since I had nowhere to take you. I told her I'd come back for you.
But you didn't. Is that why she hates me so much? You left her to raise a child she didn't want? How could you do that to me?
I'm so sorry. I was grieving for your mother.
He told me that after Martha kicked him out, he tried to get back on his feet. He was homeless for months. He'd watch the house and sometimes he'd see me out playing. He thought I was happy, so he left town.
I had nothing to offer you, Belle.
When morning came, I went into the agency dressing room and fell asleep. Later that day, Richard and I went back to the mansion. As I packed my clothes, I could hear Richard and Martha exchange some very unkind words.
What do you plan to do now?
Sandra and I were unpacking in my new apartment. I didn't have much yet, but with what Richard was paying me, I knew I'd have loads of stuff soon. I was excited. It had been a week since the craziest night of my life. So much was revealed that night. Richard and I were still getting used to being father and daughter. I talked to Richard about going to college. He thinks it's a wonderful idea.
You're going to give up modeling so soon?
No, I'll do both. There was a knock on the door, and when I opened, Richard and a man I'd never seen before were standing there. The man was wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase.
Belle, hi. This is Warren, your grandfather's lawyer. May we come in?
The apartment was still unfurnished, so we stood in the kitchen and used the island as our table. Sandra excused herself and left. Bye-bye. What's this about?
Warren has something for you to see.
Warren handed me a stack of papers. I was confused at first, but as I kept reading, I realized what they were. It was my grandfather's will. I don't understand. It says that the mansion and the restaurant are mine?
Your grandfather changed his will a few hours before he died.
I stare at the papers in disbelief. Why was I never told this? I've been waiting tables at my own restaurant? The lawyer said that Martha paid him to hide the will. She still paid him every year. Over the next few days, the lawyer turned himself in to the police. Martha was arrested soon after. I also hired a lawyer. Annabelle apologized for the part she played in her mother's evil plans. She also learned that Grandpa had left her some money in his will. She asked what I planned to do with the restaurant. I told her I was planning to sell it. She wanted to buy it with the money Grandpa left her, and I agreed. I wanted nothing to do with the mansion. It reminded me of all the cruel things Martha did. I was going to sell it too, but Richard had a brilliant idea.
We could start our own modeling agency. I even have a name. What do you think about Belle Models?
It was perfect. Months later, Richard and I stood in front of my childhood home. Now, Belle Models.
It's so beautiful. Your mother would have been proud. I wish she was here.
Me too, but I guess that will do. I pointed to the mural on the front wall of the mansion. It was a painting of my mom holding me when I was a baby. My dad held my hand as we walked inside, ready to start our new life. Oh, and did I tell you? I was also going to college to study photography.
Bye, Mrs. Jenkins. Thanks for having me for dinner.
Bye, Brent. Tell your mom I said hi.
I'm an ordinary teenager with a strange story. Or maybe not. Stick around and listen to the rest of my story. My family always had issues with maintaining their weight. I figured this is why my best friend and I, Timothy, who lived next door, got along so well. We were the same size. Timothy had a younger sister, Sherry, who hung out with us. She wasn't one of those whiny little sisters. Sherry was actually pretty cool. I never really thought about my weight until that one time when Granddad needed to go to the hospital, and those firefighters had to bust those walls down with a sledgehammer to get him out. Granddad had been bedridden because of his weight, and when he got sick, Mom called an ambulance. I watched as the paramedics came to the room to get him and told Mom they needed help to move him. They called the firefighters, and that's when we lost the wall of the house. A crane was used to pick Granddad off the bed and place him on the trolley. Then they used an automatic pulley to pull him into the ambulance. The eyes of the neighborhood families bore into my Granddad as though he was some kind of spectacle at a circus. When they finally got Granddad in, they whisked him away. Sadly, Granddad didn't leave the hospital that night. It was then and there, I decided it was time to lose some weight. I checked YouTube, watched a few videos with some reputable doctors and physical trainers, and got started. The first month was hard. I did have a few cheat days at the beginning, but when I lost those first 2 pounds, that was all I needed to keep me motivated. Over the next few weeks, Timothy and I didn't spend as much time together. We didn't have a fight or anything, but I was just so focused on getting my weight down that it consumed most of my time. Instead of getting a lift with Timothy and his parents to school, I decided to walk. Instead of eating in the school cafeteria where I'd succumb to the smells of the food, I ate in the school's courtyard. After I lost about 50 pounds, it seemed as though the invisible spell that was placed over me in high school was suddenly removed. Kids who never told me hi before spoke to me. Needless to say, my social life blew up, and at 17, I had my first date. Soon it was that time, where we had to choose our prom king and queen. I was excited for Timothy when I heard he was nominated for prom king. I really hoped he'd win so he could leave high school with a bang. After gym class, I walked into the locker room, unknown to the other guys.
Okay, so Kezia told us she'd fix the ballots since she's on the committee.
Kyle said.
And I'll borrow my dad's saw to slice the legs on the chair.
Paul chimed in. This is going to be amazing. When that chair cracks under his weight, and we get videos and pictures and post on social media, we'll leave a legacy that's hard to top when we leave this school. I quickly grabbed my bag and headed out of the locker room unseen. As soon as I got home, I walked over to Timothy and knocked on the front door.
Hey, Brent. How are you? Haven't seen you around lately.
Mrs. Jenkins smiled. I'm okay. Is Timothy at home? I really need to speak to him.
Timothy, Brent's here.
Mrs. Jenkins gave me one of her mama bear hugs.
It was nice seeing you. Don't be a stranger.
She walked back to the kitchen, and I watched as Timothy came down the stairs.
What do you want?
Timothy folded his arms across his chest as he stopped in the middle of the staircase. I told Timothy what I heard in the locker room.
Seems to me you're jealous because you lost all that weight and you still couldn't make the cut for prom king.
I'm just trying to save you from—
Save me from what? People who pretend to care one day and the other days just walk away from you? You made your choice to reject me, so don't come in here pretending that we're still friends, because we aren't.
Timothy walked up the stairs and I turned to walk away when Sherry called behind me.
Hi. Didn't mean to listen in on your conversation.
Hey, Sherry, you've got to talk to him, I pleaded.
I'll see what I can do.
Thanks, Sherry. I kissed her on her cheek and let myself out of the house. On the night of prom, I was pretty nervous. I stood in the crowd with my then-girlfriend, Victoria, and watched as Timothy proceeded to the stage when his name had been called as prom king. I tried to tell teachers at the school about what was going to happen, but they said unless I had proof, then it was my word against my peers. Timothy got up to the stage and waved at the crowd who was cheering him on. I watched as cell phones were lifted in the air and students began to record and take pictures. My stomach churned. I knew what was about to happen, but there was nothing I could do about it. After the prom queen was called up and they took a few photos, it was time for the king and queen to sit on their throne. As Timothy sat on the chair, a loud pop came from the chair as the chair legs broke off. Timothy's arms flew in the air, and finally the chair toppled off the back of the stage. There was silence for a few seconds, then an uproar as the students laughed at the sight. Even Victoria doubled over with laughter. I rushed to Timothy's side. He held his arm and groaned in pain as teachers tried to help him up. But Timothy was a big dude, so it took them a few minutes. An ambulance was called, and I drove back with Timothy to the hospital. At the hospital, Timothy was wheeled away, and I sat in the waiting room. I called Timothy's parents as well as my own to tell them what happened. Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins and Sherry arrived before my parents. I cried on Mrs. Jenkins' shoulder. I am such a bad friend. I'm so ashamed of who I became after I lost the weight. Maybe if I was a better friend, Timothy would have listened, and we wouldn't be in the hospital. Mrs. Jenkins held my face between her hands gently and looked me in the eye.
Now you listen here. Timothy is in that hospital bed because he didn't listen to you. Don't you dare place that burden on yourself. Was Timothy a good friend to you? Was he cheering you on and trying to help you lose weight? As a person, you are allowed to grow and improve. Friendship is a two-way street. Timothy had his part to play as well.
Mom and Dad arrived about 15 minutes later, and we filled them in on what happened.
Family of Timothy Jenkins?
A male doctor walked into the room and called. We all stood up and walked over to the doctor.
Timothy took a hard fall. The bone that connects his elbow and forearm was completely shattered. He underwent surgery and we had to place a pin in his arm. He's still a bit groggy from his surgery, but will allow one person to visit him in a few minutes.
Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins told me to go and chat with Timothy, and I followed the doctor to Timothy's room. The doctor nodded at me and told me I had 5 minutes before he left the room. Hi. I walked over to Timothy's bedside and sat on the chair. His left arm was in a cast.
Hey, I didn't expect to see you here.
Look, we've both made mistakes over the past few months. It doesn't mean we still can't be friends. I'm sorry for the way I acted. It just felt nice being seen, you know?
I'm sorry too. I guess we've both got a lot to learn about friendship.
I chatted for a few more minutes with Timothy before the doctor told me it was time to leave. I hugged Timothy and left the room. As soon as Timothy got out of the hospital, he told me that he wanted to lose weight. We started him with a different diet, and it was about 6 months till he got full use of his arm once again before we began to train together. When I started to hang out with Timothy once more, I faded into the background again. But this time I didn't mind. Over the next year, Timothy worked hard to lose the weight. In college, some of the kids at high school went to the same college that we did. They reminded us that we'd always be the fat kids from high school. Timothy and I laughed at them. The other kids didn't dare try to pick a fight with us, though. One night during one of the college frat parties, Timothy and I stood outside in the backyard, when suddenly we were doused with beer. Timothy and I looked up on the balcony. Paul and Kyle held 2 empty buckets in their hands and laughed hysterically. Timothy clenched his fists.
I'm going to kill those guys.
I held Timothy back. They aren't worth it. Let's just leave. On the way home, we saw a house on fire and a lady's screams were coming from inside. I immediately pulled the car over and Timothy and I hopped out. The lady, dressed in a robe, ran out to the balcony with a teenage girl.
Please help us.
Do you have a ladder?
Timothy called up to her.
Yes, it's by the pool in the backyard.
Timothy sprung into action and quickly retrieved the ladder. He placed it against the wall, and I climbed up and helped the girl down first, then the lady. By the time the lady climbed down the ladder, we heard a few cheers from a small group of neighbors who had gathered to see what the commotion was about. A few minutes later, sirens blared and police and firefighters arrived on the scene, followed by an ambulance. The lady and girl thanked Timothy and I before they went into the ambulance and headed to the hospital. That night, Timothy and I got an interview on one of the TV stations. After all the excitement died down, we headed home. A few days later, there was a knock on my front door. I opened it and was surprised to find Kyle and the lady that Timothy and I rescued a few days ago. "Good afternoon," Kyle spoke first.
Thank you so much for saving my mom and sister.
I was shocked.
And this is a little thank you from me.
Kyle's mom handed me a cake. Thanks, I was just glad to help.
And I'll make sure Kyle never bothers you and Timothy again.
Kyle and his mom thanked me again. I watched as they walked over to Timothy's house. About a year later, at Timothy's birthday party, Sherry kissed me. She admitted that she had a crush on me over the years, but she wasn't sure how I felt about her. Just then, Timothy passed.
You better be this girl's boyfriend. I can't stand to see another one of her notebooks covered with your name and hearts all around it.
Sherry blocked her face and laughed. Maybe I can do something to fix that. After the party, Sherry and I went on a few dates. I must admit that it did feel a bit weird at first, but after our 5th date, I asked Sherry to be my girlfriend. Sherry and I had been dating for a year, and things were going great when I got an unexpected visitor.
Hi, Brent.
Victoria said. She held a toddler in her hand. "What are you doing here?"
I came to let you know that I'm taking you to court for child support.
Victoria handed me a document. Child support for what?
For this.
Victoria pointed at the toddler in her hands. Just then, Mom walked into the room and I quickly explained the situation to her and handed her the document.
Well, let's go and do a test now.
Mom went to the closet and grabbed her purse.
Ain't nobody going to do any test on my baby.
Victoria snarled. Mom grabbed her by the arm.
And ain't no little girl going to scam my son into paying child support for a child that ain't his.
Mom closed the door. When I told Sherry, she didn't say anything. About 2 weeks later, my parents, together with the lawyer, joined me in front of the judge. The lawyer told the judge that my parents and I wanted to do a paternity test to make sure that the child was mine, but Victoria denied us. The judge ordered Victoria to let me do the paternity test, and she adjourned the meeting for the following week. That same day, I took the paternity test, and we received the results a few hours later. I wasn't the father. I called Sherry, and I thought she'd be as excited as I was, but again, she didn't say anything. A few weeks later, as I flipped through the TV stations, I stopped when I saw Timothy on a paternity TV show. Intrigued, I leaned in to take in the show. Lo and behold, a few seconds later, Victoria walked out with her toddler. I watched Victoria and Timothy argue about who the father of the baby was. Finally, the host read the test results, and Timothy was the father of the baby. Timothy being the father of the child and the age of the child meant that Timothy and Victoria were together while Victoria and I were still in a relationship. I waited on Timothy's front porch for him to return home. As soon as I saw him, I landed a blow to his face that knocked him off his feet. "You slept with Victoria and then gave me a hard time about being a bad friend?" I walked away, then I turned back. "Tell Sherry that it's over between us. I figured she knew all along it was your baby and not mine. I'm so over the both of you." I switched my college and stayed at the dorm and only visited my parents once a month, even though I spoke to them every day on the phone. As soon as I finished college, I moved away and started a new life. I got married to a beautiful woman named Megan, and we have 2 beautiful kids together. As I look back on my experience, what was most amazing is you can be friends with someone for years and never really know who they are. I'm not stalking her. I'm not being overprotective. I just want to make sure she's fine. You promised to give her more space, remember? But what if she gets hurt or trips on something? What if something goes wrong? Dude, she goes out all the time and nothing ever happens. Besides, she's right in front of the house. Gosh, she's just a child. Anything could go wrong. 2 tiny versions of me were literally perched on my shoulder, giving me conflicting advice. Not being able to cope with the indecision anymore, I stood up abruptly, rushing to the front door. Something occurred to me on my way, and I decided to pick up a trash bag, so Pat would think that I simply came to dispose of the trash and not to watch her. Immediately, I stepped out of the house with the trash bag. I heard Pat screaming my name.
Brian! Brian, help me, help me!
I ran towards her voice, and I discovered the most terrible thing possible. If you stick to the end of this video, you'll find out exactly what it was. In the meantime, like this video and subscribe to this channel, if you haven't already. If you don't do it immediately,
Brian, what's going on?
Huh? I'm recording a video for Storytime Animated, the best animated storytelling channel on YouTube.
Did they tell you to laugh like a witch and behave like a psycho?
I laughed. Nah, Mom, that was just me. I was trying to convince people to like my video and subscribe to the channel. It's a YouTube thing. You may not understand. Mom rolled her eyes.
Whatever, just remember to finish your video quickly so you don't miss dinner.
Sure, Mom. I smiled. Mom left the room. I clicked the record button on my camera and set the tripod up correctly as I had nervously pushed it down when Mom surprised me. I need to get a lock for that door. Looking straight into the camera in true YouTube fashion, I continued with my story. I used to be an only child. It was fun for the first 5 to 7 years of my life, but subsequently, I started feeling lonely. I had friends I hung out with, but none of them could fill the emptiness in my soul. I knew what could happen, so I decided to confront my parents about it. Mom, Dad, I have to talk to you about something urgent.
What is it, my boy?
My dad asked kindly. I'm tired of being an only child. It's so boring and lonely. I want a little brother, and I want him as soon as possible. Mom's lips suddenly started to quiver. She burst into painful tears, and Dad had to comfort her by resting her head on his lap and patting it. He looked up at me sternly and ordered me to leave. I didn't know it at the time, but Mom and Dad had been struggling to get pregnant again since they had me, but nothing had worked. All the pregnancies had been failures. It was a traumatic topic for her, and that was why she lost it. She cried throughout that night, and no one talked to me till the next day. I came back from school the next day, had a bath, and changed my clothes. When it was time for dinner, Mom finally decided to say something.
Brian, we want a sibling for you also, but it's not in our power. When the time is right, you will get one.
I nodded and continued eating. If I had said what I had in mind at that time, I'm sure my dad would have smacked me. Fast forward to 3 years later. Mom was 9 months pregnant, and it was her due date. The last 9 months had been filled with joy and happiness. My parents were overjoyed at the long-anticipated pregnancy, and I was ecstatic to finally have a little brother all to myself. Someone who would look up to me and whom I can be a good example to. We got to the hospital and waited outside the labor ward, listening to my mother's screams. She cried and screamed so much that my dad and I started shedding tears too. In true panic mode, he tried to run into the labor room and make sure his wife was all right, but security men and some male nurses positioned outside the room stopped him. The screams and cries went on for so long, almost driving my dad to insanity. A couple of hours later, the cry of a newborn child was heard, and we were allowed to go in. Dad carried his new child and kissed it. I was about to do the same when I found out that the child was a girl and not a boy. No! I screamed internally. Not a girl! Girls have too many issues. I want a little brother. I left the room without touching her. Dad came out of the room and asked me why I refused to carry my little sister. I lied, saying that I did it because I didn't want to break her. Not knowing what relationship I could have with a female sibling, I unconsciously neglected and avoided her. I think my emotional absence in her life made her want to be around me more. She followed me around, just wanting to hang out and spend some time with me, but I always reprimanded her, telling her to stay as far away from me as possible. One day, my mom brought her to my bedroom.
Brian, we're going to be unavailable this weekend. A babysitter is coming, but her main duty is to make sure you guys eat and sleep when you're supposed to, and never leave the house. Every other thing is up to you. Make sure Pat is safe.
Fine, I said grudgingly, unhappy to be stuck with Pat. The babysitter came, but she didn't care if we ate or left the house. She just ate almost all our food, watched some TV, and talked to her friends. I didn't see the point in hiring her because I did everything myself. After I prepared lunch for Pat, the babysitter, Susie, and myself, we ate in the dining section before Susie left us, leaving her dirty plate and cup on the table. I washed everything, then carried Pat to my room and locked the doors. I told Pat to take a nap on my bed while I played some video games, but she refused and insisted on joining me. I let her play and she almost beat me, but I managed to get the upper hand when the game was almost over. I was shocked and asked her how she learned to play, but she told me that it was her first time. I couldn't believe that she was naturally so good, so I kept testing her with different games, and she always put up a great fight, or just beat me mercilessly. We bonded over game playing, and this was how we became friends. The weekend flew by quickly, and our parents came back, grinning from ear to ear.
Guys, we have great news.
My dad started.
A few modeling agencies reached out to us concerning Pat, and we've decided to have a meeting with them. They showed us how the kid modeling system works, and everything is perfect. Pat will become a child model for the agency, and our lives will change forever.
Pat was a child and didn't totally understand, so she just nodded and danced because her parents were happy. I, on the other hand, was worried about this new development. I tried talking to my parents about it, but they dismissed me, saying that this was the way they could give us a better life. I finally gave up when they convinced me that it would be good for Pat too. Pat became a kid model, and her pictures were plastered all over billboards, magazines, and advertisements. I was always worried about my little sister, so I started following her everywhere, just to make sure she was safe at all times. We were flying around the world, and people were always trying to hug or take pictures with Pat. I chased them away. I even followed Pat to the restroom and waited outside while she peed, despite her insistence that she could pee alone and nothing would happen to her. Pat had paid bodyguards, but I didn't trust them totally. As far as I was concerned, if we could pay them to take care of Pat, then someone could also pay them to take her out. All they needed was the money. I became paranoid. When Pat was around 7 years old, she lost it and screamed that I should give her some space. She'd been trying to date a 14-year-old boy whom I beat up. When I simply rolled my eyes and ignored her, she smirked and said,
You know what? It's fine. I understand why you can't simply leave me alone. You have no life of your own, you're stupid and useless. You can't survive without my money, and this is why you follow me around. If you had a life, perhaps you'd be giving me a little bit more space.
Then walked off. Pat had no idea just how bad those words made me feel. I gave up my social life to make sure that she was always safe so she'd be happy and her career would boom. But this was what she had to say to me? I decided to stop being protective of her. It was a constant war inside me, but I managed to emerge victorious most times. I avoided Pat for months and she experienced freedom like never before. Mom and Dad went on their monthly date night one Friday evening and I was alone with Pat in the living room, watching TV. For some reason, Pat decided to stand up and go outside. She'd been doing this frequently recently and I realized that she only did it to garner attention from me, so I ignored her every single time. For some reason though, this particular evening felt different. I was so worried and I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Pat had been outside in the dark for 5 minutes already, and she was just a tiny kid. This is where you met me in the story, not being able to cope with the indecision anymore. I stood up abruptly, rushing to the front door. Something occurred to me on my way, and I decided to pick up a trash bag so Pat wouldn't think that I came to watch her. Immediately, I stepped out of the house with the trash bag. I heard Pat screaming my name.
Brian! Brian, help me, help me!
I ran towards her voice, and to my horror, 2 masked men were dragging Pat into a white van while she put up a fight. She screamed, kicked, punched, bit, and even spat on the men, and I was proud of her. But she was no match for 2 male adults, being a tiny kid. Terrified that all my previous fears were finally becoming a reality, I flung the trash bag somewhere and it exploded. Not caring where the trash bag had landed or exploded, I quickly ran to the van. But Pat was already inside and the van was on the move. I ran as fast as I could to save my little sister, but there was no way I was going to outrun a van. I was almost losing sight of the van when I found a random unchained bike parked on the side of the road. I got on it and continued my chase while calling the cops, telling them what had happened and telling them to track my phone so they'd know where Pat was eventually taken to. I also put my phone on silent and hid it in my undies, so the kidnappers wouldn't throw it away in case I was caught by them. The kidnappers didn't notice that they were being followed, so they carelessly took Pat to a dirty old building and chained her to the wall of a room. I hid outside the window where Pat was chained while trying to come up with a plan. While I was still standing outside, a dirty old man approached Pat. He started telling her that he'd been watching Pat on TV for a long time and really believed she was special. According to him, the other guys wanted to blackmail Pat's parents for a huge ransom, but all he wanted was to marry her when she became 18. The man asked Pat if she'd like to marry him in the future, and Pat shed tears, but couldn't say anything because she was gagged. Enraged, I jumped into the room through the window, landing on the stupid man, holding a heavy brick that I had picked up while outside. I knocked the man out, released Pat, and ran. Unfortunately, the kidnappers caught us before we could go far and tied us together in a new room. The irritating old man later came in and angrily said that he would kill both of us for that expensive mistake. He tried to beat me up, but his colleagues stopped him, trying to escape with him because they noticed that the cops had surrounded the building. The old man came back to release my sister, just so he could use her as a shield and possibly escape with her. But the rope proved too tight to remove, and Pat struggled with everything in her. The cops finally caught and arrested him, including all his accomplices. Our parents ran and hugged us, but our joy was cut short when the cops decided to arrest me too. They said that I flung a full bag of trash on my neighbor's face, causing an explosion. Upon impact. The man's compound was filled with trash, and he sustained minor cuts and bruises on his face from the sharp objects that were also included in the trash bag. I was confused and couldn't remember the incident. My punishment was to clean the neighbor's whole compound, and while doing that, Pat decided to help me out. In the middle of our work, Pat gave me a big hug.
You know you're the best brother in the whole galaxy, right?
I laughed.
I'm also the luckiest person that has ever existed because I have you as a brother. I'm sorry about what I said before. I take it all back. Please become overprotective again.
We both laughed, and I told her that I'll try my best.
Like and subscribe if you want someone to love you the way my brother loves me. Bye. 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 Bye.